What year was that?
2011, 2012.
Okay. How was that experience?
At one point,
Test, test. Good. Welcome. Good evening. I heard it was 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and start the program. I'm Rebecca Laprelle-Thomason. I'm the Virginia Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and on behalf of our board chair, Harry T. Lester, who also resides here in Virginia Beach, I'd like to welcome you to the Brock Environmental Center for the 2nd Congressional District Candidate Forum on the Environment. What better place to have this forum here this evening? The Brock Center was built to engage, to inform, and to inspire generations to protect their environment and to save the Bay. It has been called the greenest building in the world, and we mean it when we say that. We treat all of our own runoff before it gets to the river. We capture all of the water on the roof and use it for our drinking water. We produce all of our own energy on site. And tonight, I'm so thankful to see it being used as a free community space to encourage civic engagement. So thank you for that. For people that could not attend this evening, very exciting. And another exciting tidbit, for people that can't attend in person this evening, we are streaming on Facebook Live on CBF's Facebook page, so you can stream in that way. And welcome to our virtual audience who couldn't be here in person. We're also recording the event if you would like to watch it in the future. I will say one thing about the Bay, and that is I hope you have heard and seen for yourself some really good news about the Bay. All right, I'm seeing some heads nodding. It's finally turned a corner. We're finally starting to see water clarity coming back, underwater grasses expanding, Virginia's native oyster, that really special species of oyster that filters all of our water naturally, it's finally on the rebound. Really exciting stuff. But, there's always a but in one of these, too much good news. But it's not without a lot of persistence, a lot of hard work, and a lot of policy. Tonight is about policy. Policy at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. We need the direction and the leadership from our federal legislators to save the Bay and restore our nation's largest estuary. Tonight, I will say it's not just about the Bay, it's about water, land, and air, all the essential elements we need for a clean and safe and healthy environment. Really, those things define where we live. So, I will say my thank you to Dr. Quid, who we'll welcome here in a second. Thank you to the 2 candidates running for the United States Congress, Ms. Taylor-Luria and Representative Scott Taylor. They both agreed to participate, and for their time, we could not be more thankful. So, without further delay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Quentin Kidd. Dr. Quentin Kidd is a professor, Dean of the College of Social Sciences, and Director of the Wasson Center for Public Policy at Christopher Newport University. He's no stranger to candidate forums and is widely regarded as a nonpartisan moderator and a neutral facilitator. At CNU, his teaching is focused on American politics, and political behavior, and he is well known for his research and his polls that keep us informed on public policy that we face as Virginians. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Quentin Kidd.
Thank you. All right. So the volume is up and sounds. Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, great. I sometimes have a soft voice. I'm going to try to project a little bit. Thanks, Rebecca, for the introduction. I'm going to stand here while I welcome you all. I have the privilege of moderating tonight's debate, or tonight's forum, between two candidates for Congress, and it's hosted by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, as you all know. Today we're going to hear from two people who want to represent the citizens of the 2nd Congressional District of Virginia in the 116th Congress of the United States, which will begin January 3rd, 2019. Scott Taylor, who is the incumbent, and Taylor-Luria, the challenger. The format that the two campaigns have agreed to is a question and answer between each one of them and me, with a brief intermission between the two. I urge you to listen closely to what each of them has to say, as the forum is intended to give both candidates the opportunity to educate us in this room and in the wider voting public who are watching this on Facebook Live about their perspectives on important issues regarding the environment. Please note that the views expressed by the candidates are not those of the sponsoring organization. As a 501c3, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation will not be endorsing a candidate, and neither, for that matter, will the Public University of Christopher Newport University be endorsing a candidate either, so I'm a part of that same camp. This is an educational event simply. That's all it is intended to be. One note, like in the movies, we'll have a better time hearing what the candidates have to say if you will silence your phones. You can take pictures all you want, but please silence the sound so that we don't have to hear your mother-in-law or your son or daughter call. It looks like we have a pretty full house today, so please also be mindful of everyone's ability to hear. So if you want to say something about what somebody has said, please be mindful that you might be disrupting somebody else. We're on a tight timeline. Each candidate has agreed to talk for 30 minutes about their views. And so, without further ado, let's welcome Taylor-Luria, the Democratic candidate, to the stage.
Thank you.
So I described this as a conversation that you and I are having in our living room. And nobody's out there, right? So we're going to talk about a lot about the environment, about the Chesapeake Bay. Let's start with this question. For 2 years in a row, the Trump administration has proposed eliminating funding for the Chesapeake Bay program and other Clean Water Act programs. How would you address those proposals to cut funding if you were elected to Congress?
Well, I think that all of us being here, we know that the Chesapeake Bay is a natural resource that is key to our region, and maintaining funding for the Chesapeake Bay is absolutely essential both to our environment and to our local economy. So it's really a first step to maintain the funding for the Bay. But at the same time, the current Congress, the current administration has made so many steps to roll back other protections for the environment and the mechanism by which we actually can protect the Bay. So it's concerning that recent legislation has been passed that has allowed more pesticides to go into our waterways, has allowed rollback of the timeline to meet the EPA air quality standards, also allows more pollution from coal-fired power plants, and really has sought to kill the clean water rule. So all of these things are the important tools by which we are going to protect the Bay. So the funding for the Bay is essential, but all of the other mechanisms and all of the other legislation that is key to being able to achieve those goals has been under attack. And I think that the legislation really truly is a reflection of our values. And I think that we need strong voices in Congress who have the value of protecting our environment rather than rolling back these regulations, which are just putting at threat the great work that has been done to improve the quality of the Bay. The Lafayette River right in my backyard, now has oysters, the incredible progress that we have here in the Lynn Haven River, and it would really be a shame to see those things move backwards because we've made so much progress. And on that note, I want to thank the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Brock Center for hosting us tonight, and for all the people who are such strong advocates of the environment here in the audience, because I know that you do incredible work and give of your time and your resources to help us achieve the goals that we're accomplishing within the Bay.
Okay. The federal farm bill, which you mentioned, the federal farm bill has been a major source of funding for conservation programs that assist Virginia farmers who want to protect water quality. And many say its support is needed to help save the Bay. But this massive legislation has been attacked from many different sources, many different quarters. If elected, will you support increased funding in the Farm Bill to support conservation programs that are specifically directed at Bay farmers?
I most definitely will. And so the Farm Bill is really one of the most important pieces of legislation that we have that deals with not only healthcare and the environment, but also nutrition. And if you look at the Farm Bill that gets reviewed about once every 5 years, the current Farm Bill, the bill that's been passed by the House, and our current representative voted for this bill, it cuts back so many of the programs that give farmers the tool to create conservation programs. And there's been more demand for those conservation programs amongst farmers over recent years than there have been resources for them, but we're just rolling those things back. And it cuts the conservation stewardship program by about $795 million as well. And it also allows for more exposure to pesticides from children, farm workers, endangered species in our environment, and that's not acceptable. And when we're talking about the Farm Bill as well, we have to talk about the aspect of not only the environment, but the people who live in the environment. And obviously another major factor with the current Farm Bill that's been passed on the House side is that it's seeking to cut assistance to our most vulnerable in the community. So it's looking to cut food stamps, so SNAP, benefit to the tune of $23 million, and also implement work requirements. And I think that's also not acceptable for the security and welfare of the people in our community who depend on that most.
Yeah. Okay. How can the federal government support the growth of the 2nd District's burgeoning shellfish aquaculture industry, just to keep up with the farming side of this for a minute, and the jobs and environmental benefits it provides to the Chesapeake Bay region? What can be done specifically by the federal government to help encourage more of that and support what is already here?
Well, I think the programs that protect the Bay and that allow that industry to continue to grow are vital to that. And continued research and grants for research that helps improve that aquaculture industry is very important. And it takes an investment for someone to go into the aquaculture and shellfish industry. And I think that it's very important that those types of resources are available within that industry for future development. And there's been a lot of difficulty, specifically on the Eastern Shore recently, because of lack of workers in that field. The crabbing industry, several processing plants have not been able to operate this year because they haven't had workers. So we've had a complete pullback on the number of the H-2B visas that people need and that farmers need in order to bring workers here on a temporary basis to complete that work. And that's causing an increase in cost to consumers for the products. And it's also restricting the ability for that to expand on the shore.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to really put you on the spot with this one. You mentioned the oysters in the Lynn-Heavy River. Can you hear?
It seems to be cutting in and out. Okay.
Are you all right? Is that better? Maybe I'm leaning in a little bit. Oh, you can't. Oh, okay.
You can?
That may be. All right, I'll put you on the spot. Maybe it's good that they can't hear you this way. You mentioned oysters in the Lafayette River. How do you like your oysters?
I like them raw.
All right.
Yes.
All right. As you know, there is sometimes a perception of tension between environmental protection and economic development in Hampton Roads, especially in waterfront areas. Mm-hmm. What are your views on protecting versus developing waterfront in the second district? What are the best ways in your mind to strike the balance, or should there be a balance?
I think there should definitely be a balance. And development is really finding the right balance between the economic advancement of the community, the needs of the community, and needs for development. and the environmental impacts of that. And I think that development decisions made at the local level should have the tools they need from the federal level to develop those new projects effectively. If we look at the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding in our communities need updated flood maps from FEMA in order to be able to effectively develop and mitigate the effects of sea level rise on new development. For every federal dollar that is spent for development within our communities, we need to have the priority of building things that take into account flooding and sea level rise. And if you look at the building like this, I mean, this is a green building. It's completely self-sustaining, and I think that it is a great opportunity for legislation that incentivizes greener and cleaner construction that is better for our environment. So I think that that is a key thing that the government can do to force industry to think about being greener and cleaner and having a more diversified mix of energy for new facilities and new developments within our communities.
So the balance for you then is development that's greener and cleaner, not simply no development or let it go unregulated. It's greener. You're looking at a greener and cleaner development in that kind of an economy.
Well, I think greener and cleaner development is essential. But I think that development decisions are made at the local level, and local zoning, local planning commissions, local communities with their voices decide what kind of development is correct for their communities. And if you look across the district, the part of the district on the Eastern Shore, Northampton and Accomack counties approach development very differently, and they do that based off the needs of their communities. So I think those are decisions that should be made at the local level. But I think that to what degree possible, federal policies and federal resources that can help greener and cleaner development within the communities are very important.
Okay. Since you mentioned sea level rise, let's talk about the historic and projected sea level rise that is presenting Hampton Roads communities across the 2nd District and beyond, businesses, military operations, with unprecedented challenges. Area cities face serious flooding with rain, wind, and tidal events, and Tangier Island is faced with an increasingly existential threat from sea level rise and erosion. What policy solutions do you propose and support to ensure that our 2nd District communities are protected from the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding and can deal with the current issues that those communities are facing right now?
Well, sea level rise, for those of us who've lived in this area for a while, we know that it is increasingly more and more of a problem to get to work, for the military to get to the bases, for military forces to be able to deploy on time. And for this region, it's really a national security issue. And I think at the federal level, we need to have an advocate in Washington who will go there with this as a national security issue. But it's not only that, but it's a jobs and livelihood issue in this area as well. 40% of our economy is tied to Navy and DoD assets. So putting the military's ability to operate in this area at risk also puts people's jobs and livelihood at risk long range. And we need to determine the engineering solutions necessary, the resources, and dedicate the resources necessary to start combating the effects of sea level rise. And it's not just the sea level rising, it's also the land subsiding due to global warming. The Gulf Stream is slowing, that's pushing more warm water and more water towards our shores. And so that is kind of a triple effect within the Hampton Roads area. So there are programs right now, the SWIFT program, where they're seeking to put more treated wastewater back into the aquifer in order to slow the land subsidence. And there's been a lot of great partnerships. I mean, the city of Norfolk has partnered with Dutch climate scientists and engineers because in Holland they live below sea level and they've already tested and implemented different solutions to these problems. So we need to foster those partnerships, and it's also an opportunity for the region to become really a center of expertise in how to combat the effects of sea level rise, because this is kind of ground zero for sea level. And I mentioned jobs and livelihood as well. Another aspect that's directly related to that is the Port of Virginia. So 1 out of every 9 jobs in the Commonwealth is directly or indirectly tied to the port. We're about to spend $350 million to deepen and widen the Thimble Shoals Channel, and that's to bring the largest post-Panamax ships into the port. But if we don't invest in the infrastructure to move those containers by road and rail out of Hampton Roads and across the East Coast, then that's not a good investment. So we really need to seek strong investments in our infrastructure, and we need to make sure we have the resources to do that from the federal level. And without touching too much on other policy, I think that the recent tax bill that's incurred an additional $1.9 trillion in debt over the next 10 years, it really puts us in a position where we don't have the resources to invest in the infrastructure like I think that we should be.
Is there a, this is me thinking about the importance of the military in our region, the idea that the federal budget is struggling in all areas, perhaps except military spending, where there's greater resources going to military spending. Is there a military budget answer to part of the funding problem in our area to deal with sea level rise? In other words, is it a problem with funding? We know what we need to do, but we don't have the money to do it. Given the enormous influence of the military, the military plays in our area, could there be a funding stream through the military budget to help the region with that?
Well, there actually is some degree of funding for military access roads that allows military installations through the DoD to partner with the local communities in order to be able to solve some of those problems. It's a recent development that funding has come as being available through the DoD, and I think that we need to continue to expand that and work with our local communities to say what the demands are. And at the state level, I think one of our challenges is, there's 17 municipalities and counties within this region that's really impacted by sea level rise. And last year, Senator Linwood Lewis attempted to introduce a bill in the General Assembly that would have made an authority where across the region, the different affected communities could prioritize those projects where sea level rise is impacting their communities. And I think that's very important between the state and federal level, that we have a mechanism like that from within the Commonwealth to say that these are the priorities, and with the limited resources that we can get from the federal government to assist with these programs that will improve our resiliency and help us combat the effects of sea level rise, that we have a voice where those things are prioritized. So I know that that legislation will be introduced again this year in the General Assembly, and I think that will be a tool to help work between the state and local level to prioritize these projects.
And access more of those federal dollars. Great. From public statements, I think that it's safe to say, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you are opposed to drilling off the coast of Virginia in the current 5-year lease program. Is this still your position? And would you support a permanent moratorium on offshore drilling in the Atlantic?
I am opposed to offshore drilling, and I'm opposed to that indefinitely. So I would say that we all know the effects of offshore drilling could have on our community. The military has said it's bad for their operations. I've spent countless months of my life out there in the Virginia Capes operating area. I know that you can't take a carrier and all the escorts and aircraft off the coast and train properly while dodging oil platforms. So it's bad for military operations. Like I said, that's a main driver of our economy here in the region. It's also a national defense issue to interfere with military readiness. The localities, Virginia Beach and Norfolk and others, have passed resolutions to say we don't want offshore drilling. And not only that, but it's bad for the environment. If we were to have something similar to the Deepwater Horizon spill, the deleterious effects of that washing up on our shore, the impact to the bay, the blue crabs, they are at the mouth of the bay, as they spawn, and it would impact the whole ecosystem if we were to have a spill. And I'm also a small business owner with a location 4 blocks from the ocean front, so I know the impact that would have on another main driver of our economy, which is tourism. And so offshore drilling is bad for so many reasons. And there recently was an opportunity. My opponent is on the Environmental Subcommittee of Appropriations, and Representative Pengree from Maine introduced an amendment. And that amendment would have stopped offshore drilling for 5 years through the appropriations process. But he voted against it. And it's kind of puzzling why he voted against it when, he in the same breath said, I'm against offshore drilling. And, really the only thing when I think about that I can figure why he would vote against something like that is, a lot of corporate contributions to his campaign to the tune of about $50,000 has come from the oil and gas industry. So I think it's very important that we have a voice that's, not tied to the role of corporate interests in our political process. So on that note, I'm not taking corporate money from oil and gas industry or from any other corporate PACs.
Okay. All right. Now, with offshore drilling, many have raised concerns about the impact of seismic testing on marine life in the Atlantic Ocean. Do you support seismic testing, or do you oppose it?
Well, I oppose seismic testing.
Okay.
There's no need to drag around behind a ship the high-powered air gun that's going to shoot sound waves into the ocean and interrupt the ecosystem. It impacts everything from the tiniest zooplankton at the bottom of the food chain all the way up to the endangered right whales, and everything in between as far as the ecosystem is concerned. So seismic testing, obviously a precursor to offshore drilling, is not something that we should pursue. And the estimates of the oil and gas reserves off the coast are far less than we could achieve by drilling for those than were we to try other renewable sources of energy such as wind off of our coast.
So, since you mentioned wind, do you see offshore wind in the future of the coastal Virginia waters?
I most definitely do. And I think it's really good news that there is a test program underway with Dominion Energy to make 2 6-megawatt wind turbines off the coast. And I think wind is an investment that we can make and have long-term greener, cleaner energy. And that project is the first one to be done in federal waters under the program for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management through their permitting process. And the land that it sits on could create another 5,000 megawatts on that 112,000 acres. That's enough to power 500,000 homes, and that's carbon-free. So I think that that's definitely a direction that would be beneficial for us to go to increase wind energy, and it's good that we're doing this test platform. But it's not only the wind energy and how that's good for our environment and providing another energy source, it's also a huge economic opportunity for Hampton Roads. With our port here and this being the first project like this done in federal waters, we could be the epicenter, the hub for the development of wind energy platforms across the East Coast. So I see this as a real opportunity for our region, and we should be very proud. The governor came down recently to visit the ship that's going to be doing the initial surveys for that. And I think that this is a huge opportunity for Hampton Roads and really for the country, because it is an unharnessed source of energy that we need to add to our energy mix in order to reduce carbon emissions and reduce all these things that are causing global warming and climate change.
Right. Okay. So, no to offshore drilling, no to seismic testing, yes to offshore wind.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This was a question submitted online by an attendee when they registered for the program tonight. The U.S. military has been increasingly supportive of efforts to expand its use of renewable energy, both domestically and in overseas operations. Yet Congress has recently attempted to diminish this, second-guessing military leaders. What would be your office's policy toward military requisition of deployment of and research into renewable energy technology?
Well, I think that the military has set a lofty goal to get to 25% renewable energy by 2025. They've made a 42% increase already in the renewable energy sources that they're using. If you drive past Oceana, you see the solar panels, and many of the other installations within the area have already made progress in renewable energy on the bases. And energy security is very important, so I understand thoroughly why the military leaders, and my 20 years in the military, I know that needing fuel to operate is a constraint on military operations. And if we can start with our installations and cutting back that footprint, that provides some energy security. And the military, there are many things that have been developed and researched and implemented as a tool for the military that have later become standards within industry. So in the solar and the renewable energy sector, I think this is another huge opportunity for research that could provide those mobile tools for soldiers on the battlefield to have renewable energy sources to accomplish their mission, and to what degree possible cut their reliance on fossil fuels. So I definitely think that it's important to continue to push the military in that direction, specifically for the installations, because greener, cleaner energy, the many installations in this area, that would be of a huge benefit. but also the development of new technology that could transfer from the military to other applications in industry and across our community.
Okay. Let me shift to the Eastern Shore for a minute. The poultry industry in Virginia, on Virginia's Eastern Shore, has been expanding pretty significantly in recent years, giving rise to concerns about potential water quality, air quality, and simply water pollutions. You know, water quality issues, air quality issues, and water pollution issues. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality has a role in regulating these farms, but not all aspects are regulated by DEQ. For example, ammonia-containing air emissions from large poultry houses are not currently regulated by DEQ. Do you think poultry houses, the expansion of poultry houses can be done safely on the Eastern Shore, or is that something that we should try to cut back on? Is there any federal role in either encouraging it or discouraging it?
Well, when we look, I spend a lot of time throughout the campaign zigzagging back and forth across the Eastern Shore. So, you know, in Accomack County specifically, we've been up to as far up as Chincoteague and Wachapreague and Anancock and Exmoor and all the way down to Cape Charles, up and down Northampton and Accomack counties. And there is a drastic difference between the two counties and how they have implemented local zoning laws and what they allow as far as agricultural and poultry processing facilities. In Accomack County, the increased proliferation of these chicken houses is causing quite a few problems. It's a pollution issue, like you said. The ammonia from the chicken waste, chicken shit is actually moist, so the fans in these large poultry houses blow this into the environment. And when the ammonia settles on the ground through rainwater, that is nitrogen that washes into the bay. And I read the estimate that about 16% of the nitrogen that washes into the bay and is, you know, causing pollution within the bay comes from, you know, this similar type of agricultural runoff. So the increased proliferation of the chicken houses is adding to more nitrogen in the bay. And the, you know, DEQ licensing process, you know, 3 of these facilities have been required through DEQ to achieve federal standards for monitoring. But the standards really don't monitor everything. They require a visual test of the runoff. There's no actual test for the pollutants or for bacteria. And, you know, the people on the shore are very concerned about their water source. There's only one aquifer on the northern part of the shore. This poultry farming is estimated to take about 3 million gallons of water a day from their sole water source, and at the same time polluting it back without measuring how much it's polluting it back. So I most certainly think that there are more stringent requirements necessary to monitor the runoff from these type of agricultural activities to protect the people on the shore, because obviously they need clean water to drink. And, you know, at the same time, I do recognize that poultry farming is a source of livelihood for many people on the shore in Accomack County. So it's a balance, but I think it can be done safely for our environment and protecting the people in the communities as well. This ammonia going into the air, it causes respiratory problems, it causes health problems in people in the community as well. So we really need to look at the different aspects of how this increased density of these facilities is impacting those communities. And, you know, the communities on the Eastern Shore are challenged. 1 out of every 5 people on the Eastern Shore lives below the poverty line. And, you know, we can't add insult to injury by then not having clean water and not having clean air to breathe. So there really is a responsibility at the federal level to make sure, not just in Accomack County, but anywhere else in the country, that these type of activities are happening, that we're protecting these communities.
Okay. We have time for 2 more questions, and then we're going to give you a few minutes to say some remarks. The Trump administration claims, and these are questions from the audience, the Trump administration claims that less fuel-efficient cars are safer. In fact, I think the president himself said that, not just his administration staffers. Do you support the rollback of the EPA's clean car standards?
Most definitely not. I don't understand the link between fuel efficiency and safety, but what I know is that we've made huge strides in fuel efficiency and emissions control in the cars that are on our road over the last several decades, and we need to continue in that direction. And, you know, when I heard this talked about, it was really the idea that this is too hard for the auto companies to continue to make cars more and more fuel efficient. They'll get to be too expensive. But there's really no proof of that whatsoever. There's nothing to show that the car manufacturers cannot continue to advance their technology at the same time that they're making them more fuel efficient, better for our environment. And for all of us who fill up our gas tank, it's kind of nice to have a fuel efficient car, and you spend less money on fuel over the lifetime of the car. And so, we really need to look at these fuel efficiency standards, because controlling this pollution in our environment, it's easier to control it at the tailpipe and the smokestack before it ends up in our waters and we have to clean it up. So I think that things such as fuel efficiency standards for cars and continuing to improve on those is really essential moving forward, because we cannot deny the impact of carbon emissions in our environment. We cannot deny the fact that climate change is real and that is leading to what we see manifested here in sea level rise. So just taking one small thing like saying car emission standards, and then you could rack up the whole list of other things that are in this mantra of science is not real and these things are not man-made. The president was just on 60 Minutes last night, and he was asked, is climate change real? And he said, well, something's happening, but I'm not sure what, and I think it's going to reverse itself. And that scientists really have clearly a political agenda, and I think that is completely untrue. I believe in science. I believe in the scientific facts that have been proven of the damage that we're doing to our environment. And the recent IPCC report showed that we are in a dire situation. We don't have a lot of time to start acting and to start making sure that all of these things that we're doing to damage our environment, that we stop. And clean car standards and fuel efficiency standards are part of that. So I think that they're very important, and we should not allow the EPA to roll those back.
Okay. I'm gonna, because I want you to be able to use your closing statement for whatever you want to say. I'm gonna use this as your last question. It sort of segues into your closing statement, whatever that is. What is your boldest policy idea to build a clean energy future in Virginia if you get elected to Congress?
Well, I think that I've thought a lot about economic development, and then what we need to do to diversify the economy in this area, and that's a whole nother discussion. But I think that in the realm of economic development, I really think that we need to view legislation as a reflection of our values, and we need to, for new economic development, for new construction, we need to use legislation to work for the environment, not against the environment. So rather than policies that incentivize more exploration for fossil fuels, such as incentivizing offshore drilling or building more pipelines or any of the other things, that is a long list that the current administration has done, in my mind, to roll back protections for our environment, I think that we need to boldly use legislation in a way that incentivizes greener, cleaner energy across the board throughout the country, and whether that be through tax incentives or other vehicles that we do that. But we need to make it attractive for industry to do what's right for our environment.
And I think we're right on time, and so you have the opportunity to make some closing statements, and then we'll take a short intermission.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Kidd, for moderating, and thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I know you're here because you care about the environment that we live in and the beautiful Chesapeake Bay that surrounds us in this community. And thank you to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and everyone here who's a volunteer and staff, and all the work that you do to continue to improve the health of the Chesapeake Bay and to create a healthy environment for us to live in. And, really, I think that protecting our environment for future generations, my daughter Violet is right here in the front row, that's got to be a priority for our future generations. It has to be a priority for this district. It has to be a priority for the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. And it has to be a priority for our whole country. And, we need to have legislation. We need to have people who are willing to go to Washington and act boldly in ways that we can create legislation to combat the effects of climate change. Like I said, we need to incentivize greener and cleaner energy development and a greener and cleaner mix of energy for our future generations. And we need to protect our air and water for this generation and the next. So I think if we want to change that conversation in Congress in a direction that is good for our environment, We need to change the people in Congress. And like I mentioned, the recent IPCC report, it shows that the time we have to act is very short to start making a round turn on these things that are impacting climate change and, in our region, sea level rise, and kind of really very dire for our future to live here and live healthily in this environment. And, you know, our district covers every inch of the Virginia coastline and the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And we can't continue to have a representative in Congress who votes to roll back the timeline for EPA air quality standards. We can't have a representative who allows more pollution from coal-fired power plants. We can't have a representative who votes to gut the clean water rule. And we can't have a representative who votes for legislation that allows more pesticides into our valuable waterways. You know, I'll tell you that of the people you're going to hear from tonight, I'm the only one who is endorsed by our allies in the environmental community. I have both the endorsement of the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters, and that's because these are issues that I value very dearly and will be an advocate for in Washington. You know, when you hear from Representative Taylor after the short intermission, I think he's going to come up here and he's going to tell you, he's going to pretend that he's a friend of the environment. But I can tell you he's not. If you look at the League of Conservation Voters, which puts together a scorecard every year for every member of our legislature, his score is 6 out of 100. That shows truly that he is not a friend of our environment, and all of these things that I had the opportunity to mention tonight that are harming the progress that we have made and that we can make for the Bay, you know, he's voted in the direction that will harm the Bay. So truly, if the environment is a top priority for you, like the environment is a top priority for me, I think the choice is clear. And my name is Taylor-Luria, and I ask for your vote. And your vote for me on November 6th is also a vote for the environment. So thank you again for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a really quick intermission. Please be back at 5 till 8 sharp so we can keep this program going. Thanks so much. On time. Yeah, we're good. We're at 7:43, so
Did we end a little early or a little
maybe a
late?
minute
Oh,
early.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
I just, you know, you never know how long they were going to really go with their closing statement.
No, it was good. She was going for 2 minutes, and then I sort of stood up, and
Okay.
it was around 3 minutes-ish.
Okay. Yeah.
We have sound back. All right, I think we're ready to start again. Let's welcome Congressman Scott Taylor to the stadium, to the risers.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Oh, you already got water out here.
Yeah. And I can tell you that glass is new. It isn't recycled.
Well, I did ask him to, because they distill the water here on the roof, and they make beer out of it. Pleasure House Brewing. And so I asked if you had any, but I think they were out.
So I'm going to ask you mostly, as I said earlier, let's just pretend like we're in the living room having a conversation, because this is how it would be.
These chairs are much more comfortable than my living room.
So I'm going to ask you mostly the same questions so the audience can compare answers and listen to what each candidate has to say. But since you're in Congress right now, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about some things the Trump administration is doing related to the environment and ask you to just comment on them.
Sure.
So to start off, for 2 years in a row now, the Trump administration has proposed eliminating funding for the Chesapeake Bay program and the Clean Water Act programs. How would you address proposals to cut funding if reelected? So these would be future budgets, future proposals to cut funding. How will you address those future proposals?
Let me preface the statement by saying, thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Thanks to CBF for putting this on. You got a great turnout, great night. I think it's important to say that there hasn't been a presidential budget signed into law in the history of this nation. So that is a suggestion. Article 1 is very clear. It's the Congress that creates the budget. So what I can tell you is, while I completely disagree with the president, I grew up on the Delmarva Peninsula, working on a farm, working in a crab house. I know watermen and farmers and fishermen and stuff like that. So the Chesapeake Bay has always been important to me. The water, the air, all of it. So I opposed it in my first term. Not only did we oppose it, because it's very easy, and on one hand in Congress, you can call people and you can shed light on things and you can apply pressure and stuff like that. On the other hand, you're one of 435. So it's difficult to get anything done. So every time we have a problem set, and I'm going to get to this specific problem set, you have to figure out what the parameters of your office are and how you can be impactful with every single situation. And that's what we do. We figure it out. So in this particular instance, with funding for the Chesapeake Bay, I sit on the Appropriations Committee. So that's where the money is. There's authorization committees that authorize certain things, but then they got to go to appropriations to get money. So while it's important that the Virginia delegation, senators, and House were certainly supportive, opposing the president, but supportive of getting the Chesapeake Bay dollars, the reality is that comes from the Appropriations Committee. So what I would submit to you is it was myself and Congressman Dush Ruppersberger from Maryland who are on the Appropriations Committee who went to the chairman and said, this is important to us. This is important to not just the Chesapeake Bay region, but this whole country. This is a national treasure. We need to continue the great efforts that many of you right here tonight have done. And that's why that money was there. That is exactly why that money was there. So I'll do the same thing. And I think it's important to say that you can oppose the administration, still retain respect from them, and get things done. If I was just to bash them on every single thing, I would get nothing done for you. And that's not my goal. I want to be impactful. I want to solve problems and help people. And that's why I'm there, and that's what happened. And I'll continue to do the same thing.
Okay. The federal farm bill has been a major source of funding for conservation programs that assist Virginia farmers who want to protect water quality. And many say that its support is needed to help save the Bay.
Sure.
But this massive legislation has been attacked from many different sides and many different sources. If re-elected, will you support increased funding in the Farm Bill to support conservation programs for Bay farmers?
Yeah, I think there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's roughly $900 million in conservation money. I think the conservation programs have been very successful. For example, in the Back Bay, I just heard this morning about the fantastic health of grass in the Back Bay, and part of that was because of a successful conservation program. We need the same thing on the Eastern Shore. I will talk about, with the Farm Bill, I don't do things in a vacuum necessarily. Every single bill that I've introduced, every one has a Democrat co-sponsor. Every single one. So we work across the aisle. I'm in a Climate Solutions Caucus that is a bipartisan group, and I have a Chesapeake Bay Advisory Council that I've continued the tradition that Congressman Ridgell did, and I don't know what party anybody's on there. I have no idea. But why I say that is because there are different stakeholders that come and they tell us what's important to them, what they support, what they don't support, and they help me, because the reality is, in a diverse legislative body, both the strength and the weakness is the fact that people come from all different backgrounds. So I rely on CBF, I rely on farmers and fishermen and things, and all of you to be able to inform me to help be more impactful for you up there. So sure, I would support increased funding in a future farm bill.
Okay. How can the federal government support the growth of this in the 2nd Congressional District of the burgeoning shellfish aquaculture industry and the jobs and the environmental benefits that are related to that? How can the federal government support and encourage more of that particular industry?
Well, I think there's some reps from here from Ballard Construction who had the honor of harvesting and seeding clams at one point last year. I'm not a good seeder. I can harvest well, I'm a good laborer, but I'm not good at seeding. I think I'd like to see, well, Virginia oysters are in 50 states. 50 states. But they're not, they're kind of boxed out of Europe. I'd like to see our oysters over there in Europe as well. I'd like to see them around the world. So at the federal level, trade is a part of it. Trade is a part to be able to create trade deals that allow for our aquaculture to be exported around the world. That's one thing that they could do to help out. There's another issue, too, that our office has been instrumental in working on for months now, and that is, discharge. You guys have all seen the ships that are out there in the bay, and they're, the shellfish industry, aquaculture industry is concerned about discharge from those ships as they wait to go into the port. And our office has been working and trying to find the levers and the decision makers to be able to prevent that from happening, therefore not jeopardizing the aquaculture and shellfish industry. So there's a plethora of things that we can do at the federal level. And again, I go back to the fact that I rely on folks like yourselves in those industries. And they do a fantastic job. I got to tell you, not just CBF, but the industries themselves. They've been in my office in D.C. multiple times, orienting me to the issues. Because the reality is, as your congressman, and certainly because I'm on the Appropriations Committee, I might have 12 to 15 meetings every day. And the first meeting might be about Alzheimer's research funding. And the next one might be ballistic missile defense and everything in between. So as you can imagine, there's tons of issues. So we really rely, and you guys do a fantastic job of showing up and orienting us to what we need and how we can be impactful for you.
So keeping with this idea of developing industries that are reliant on a good environment, there is oftentimes I would argue, a perceived tension between environmental protection and economic development. In Hampton Roads, and not just in Hampton Roads, probably in any waterfront community in the world, really. What are your views about protecting versus developing in the 2nd Congressional District? What's the best way to strike a balance? Does it need to be balanced, or does it need to be weighed toward one side or the other?
I think it needs to be balanced. You know, like I said, I grew up on the shore. I understand that, you know, farmers, their economic vitality relies on the ground, right? Same thing with fishermen and stuff like that. But you have to have it has to be a balance. Otherwise, you're going to deplete your resources, and it's going to be bad long term. So, I think that in terms of development, while the reality is in development, certainly real estate development and things like that is definitely at the state and the local zoning laws. I think that we can create, and again, we can create. How do you say it? Zoning that basically has more conservation in it, right? Where you have, like, for example, density that's sort of off to one side that has more open space. I think that's a good thing. I think that we should limit some development. At the same time, you have to have a balance of not basically reducing the property values of people's property. So not necessarily physically taking it by eminent domain, but zoning it out their value. So I think it's a balance. It's always been a balance.
And do you think we have the balance right now?
You got to be more specific than that.
Generally speaking, do you think the incentives for economic development versus environmental protection
I'll give you an example.
Are well balanced right now?
I think we can do better, right? So we live in Virginia Beach, right? And we love Virginia Beach. But we're a cul-de-sac city, and we have a lot of sprawl. Sprawl is worse on the environment. Sprawl is more expensive on the city services. So again, I think that we could do a better job of zoning that has density, that has open space in it as well, a little bit more up necessarily than out, right? So I don't know if we have the perfect balance all across my district, but we can always do better.
Okay. Let's shift subjects a little bit. Talk about
our district.
What's that?
I said our district, not my district, our district.
So let's talk about sea level rise for a moment. Historical and projected sea level rise is presenting Hampton Roads communities, businesses, the military with unprecedented challenges, probably more so than any other metropolitan region in the country with the exception of New Orleans. Area cities face serious flooding with rain, wind, tidal events. The Tangier Island is faced with what people are calling increasingly an existential threat from sea level rise and erosion. What policy solutions do you propose or support to ensure that the 2nd Congressional District and its communities are protected from the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding?
So I think the first thing is to say, again, I'm part of this nonpartisan climate solutions caucus that tries to reduce the politics and actually get things done. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here to just give you talking points and give you just rousing rhetoric. I want to tell you what we're doing, and let's talk about that. So the first thing that in this area, and you're correct, Doctor, that we are the 2nd most vulnerable area in the nation to recurrent flooding and sea level rise. That's a fact, right? It's a fact that we have soundings off the Chesapeake Bay, that we have sea level rise. Norfolk has subsided, so they're sinking a little bit. We got increased volatility in storms and water coming up through Back Bay that's increasing the flooding there. So we have to do some things. The first thing that we worked with Old Dominion University, we worked with William and Mary University, to try to get, we have a bill, I've introduced a bill, and it's bipartisan. Again, every single bill that I have introduced has a Democrat co-sponsor. And it designates centers of excellence in recurrent flooding and sea level rise. Why? The reason why is because you have, hopefully, research and development. Once it's designated, you have research and development dollars that flow there. You have potential economic clusters of businesses that work on resilience that could help us here, also around the coast of the United States, and potentially around the world. So that's one thing. The second thing at my level is to protect our military assets. We have 43-ish% of our economy is direct federal spending, which is why it's important I'm on the Appropriations Committee so that we have a seat at that table. And what we did in the appropriations language, and let me also say that 2% of bills that are introduced, 2%, less than 2%, are signed into law. Less than 2%. But on the appropriation side, there are 12 bills that fund the government. They go through eventually to fund the government. So you can put things on the appropriations bills that will go through. And one example that we did put through to deal with this very issue, to protect our military bases, we have 8 major military installations in our district that are vulnerable to recurrent flooding, that are vulnerable to sea level rise. So DOD can spend money for resilience on their piers and things like that over in Norfolk. What they couldn't do was their access roads, getting soldiers and sailors to and from the base. It's very clear if you're not able to get your soldiers and sailors to the base, you're not going to have a base that long. They're going to take it away. So we were able to put language in that is now law that prioritizes DOD to work with localities and states to deal with access roads and request them to have, within 30 days, they have to talk about what they're going to do to address those issues. So, I mean, we can talk, and we don't have a lot of time to do it, but we can certainly talk about how we address it on a much bigger level, on a global level, and all those things. But the reality is we have to do things now for resiliency here in this area. Our office is working with localities now to try to identify grants that deal, so we can bring money to help with out-of-date sewer drains and things like that. Obviously, Virginia Beach, out-of-date sewer drains. We had flooding that was unexpected in areas that were unexpected. So my goal is to do things. It's not to talk about it, it's to do things, and that's what we've done.
So a couple of follow-up questions to that. Is there money tied to that new language that requires the military to work with local communities? Because that seems to be the key. Local communities would probably work with any partner that had money to bring to the table because the local communities don't have it. Is there money tied to that?
DOD already has the authorization to use those monies. So now they have so they already had the authorization to use the money that they have for resilience on the base. Now they have the ability. They will have the ability to deal with access roads. So the answer is yes. You know, and then in terms of what the locality does or if there's a match, if not, that's all dependent on the actual negotiation of the base, right? But the reality is we have an issue right in Norfolk, the world's largest naval base in the world. We've got to deal with it. And Norfolk knows that, and the naval base knows it too. So, you know, I'm optimistic that we'll take care of that and protect those military assets for this area.
Given the President's interview yesterday on 60 Minutes, I've got to ask you this question. Do you believe in climate change, and is it man-made?
So I didn't see his interview, but yes, I do. And I do think that man contributes to it, absolutely. I think that, you know, the question is what we do about it, right? And there's all these arguments and stuff like that, and there's science. There's environmental science that shows very clearly things that man has contributed to it. There's also political science. And that's a reality, and you know that very well, Doctor.
I do know that.
Right? So, you know, what do you do and what can you do? One of the things I think that, and I'm not sure if it's one of your questions or not, but I'm sure the Paris Agreement will come up. And, you know, when we look at aid, when we look at what we do, what can we do with that aid? How can we be the most efficient and effective with your tax dollars? So while I grew up on the Eastern Shore of the Delmarva Peninsula, I've also been to like 45 countries, and I've spent years overseas in countries, and a lot of countries that don't have the capacity to be able to deal with these issues, which is what some of the money that's proposed was, you know, would have be used there. So I'll give you this figure. There's a study that shows that burning the rainforest in Indonesia, and some of that's man-made, some of that's farmers burning it, some of it's timber, they're burning it, some of it's because El Nino creates dry conditions and there's fires and nonstop fires that are burning. In 2015, there was a study that showed that one day of those burning fires was equivalent to the whole energy usage from the United States. One day of burning fires. Because you have billions of years of compacted carbon underneath those rainforests, and you burn the filters, the trees, and then you release that into the atmosphere, and it's devastating. So my point in all that is, I think we can find better ways to use aid to be able to actually get after the problem because it's our taxpayer dollars, we have to be responsible with it to benefit the world. But the answer to you is yes.
Okay. Shift subjects just a little bit. I've looked up some of your public statements on this, on offshore drilling. And it sounds to me like you are opposed to drilling off the coast of Virginia during the current 5-year lease program, or given the current 5-year lease program. Is that your position?
I'm so glad you gave me this opportunity, Doctor.
And would you support a permanent moratorium on offshore drilling off the Virginia coast?
All right, so the first thing is this. And I want to address a couple of things. My position is no to offshore drilling. No, it's not. I'm against it. I'm against offshore drilling. I think I need to make that very clear. We actually proposed 2 amendments to ban it off the coast of Virginia and ban it off the coast or off the East Coast to basically stop it. Right. So there also has been some misinformation about an amendment that I voted against, and that specific amendment that's being used as, quite frankly, it's the political, silly season, so it's an attack. That amendment would have stopped the leases all across the United States from being renewed or anything like that. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars in Texas and California and Alaska and the Gulf and Louisiana, who they want it. But you would have stopped, that amendment would have stopped it for all of them, which would have had devastating effects on billions of dollars, on millions of jobs, on our energy market, our economy as a nation, quite frankly. I thought it was highly irresponsible, and I actually said on the air to the patron of the bill that if it was a little bit tighter, I would have supported it, but it wasn't tight enough. But I introduced my own amendments that would barred it off Virginia, and it would have barred it off the Atlantic coast. So that is my position, and it's very public. So it's been public. And furthermore, not only have we introduced that legislation, I'm also friends with the Secretary. So I've made it very clear what my position is. And to be fair, and to be clear, our whole delegation's not opposed to offshore drilling, right? So it's important for us for me to step up and fight, even with our own delegation, because there are folks in our delegation that support it. But my position is against it. And I'll continue to do that for as long as I'm there.
So what about a precursor? What about a precursor to offshore drilling, seismic testing? Would you be supportive of banning seismic testing?
So I need to, two things. Number one, I think it's responsible to take inventory of what you have as a nation. I think that's responsible. Should you limit any potential impact? Yes. When I was sitting with the Secretary, and this is what he said, not what I'm saying, I need to do it, that some of the seismic can be taken using the same seismic that's used for sand mining, which we all support, sand mining. I think you should limit it, of course, but I think it's a responsible thing for a nation to take inventory of what their actual natural resources are.
And then the more cleaner obstructions that might be out there, wind turbines. Do you support offshore wind?
So one of the things that the Secretary also said was he felt as though there was more opportunity in wind for growth than anything else in energy. I do. I support anything that makes sense, right? So we have a lease now. And in Virginia Beach, as opposed to just about everywhere on the East Coast, there's actually a direct plug-in to the power grid right off Dam Neck, which makes it cheaper for us to start that. So absolutely.
Okay.
And plus, not only that, not only to get that kind of energy, but it also creates high-paying mechanical jobs because to work on them turbines, it's really good. It's high-paying. So we also, if we do move in that direction, which I think that we will, I think we also have to have some skills developed to be able to teach people to be able to work on turbines, so that we're not sending them over to Denmark or somewhere else. That we're actually creating that pipeline for those skilled jobs right here, and then we can expand offshore wind.
Great. Let me shift subjects a little bit on you, staying with the environment, obviously. The poultry industry on Virginia's eastern shore has been expanding pretty significantly in recent years, giving rise to concerns about potential water quality issues, air quality issues, water supply issues. Virginia DEQ has a role in regulating these farms, but not all aspects are regulated by DEQ. For example, ammonia-containing air emissions from large poultry houses are not currently regulated by the state. Do you think the poultry industry expansion is safe and can be done safely? Is there a possible role for greater federal regulation in this area?
So a couple things. Number one, I have shoveled a lot of chicken poop in my life, so I know how much it smells. I know you've seen up there. So I think that a couple things. Number one, there's an ACAMAC study right now by DEQ that started in August. And it's going to study this exact thing in terms of, not the air, but on the ground and into the water. They're studying it right now with, I think it's 2 or 3 poultry farms now. Keep in mind that poultry is the biggest industry on the Eastern Shore, provides the most jobs. So we have to have that balance that we talked about earlier. And right now there's a study. I'm interested to see what that comes out. I think all of us should responsibly figure out, or wait and see what comes out in that study and how we can move after that. And that's the same thing goes at the federal level. So the EPA, which some people in this room have fought for years to be able to get the EPA to create these certain standards for air quality and figure out, hey, how much is this impacting air quality up there? Well, the Inspector General of the EPA came out in September 2017 and said the EPA has failed to come up with a responsible way to see if that is, in fact, affecting air quality or not. So the EPA right now needs, and to be honest, I found that out as I was coming to this forum, so we are happy to send a letter to the EPA to get them off their butts and to figure out a way to be able to have a reasonable, responsible measurement on those poultry farms themselves to see how that's affecting air quality and then what we can do about it. So I think it's important to see what comes out of the studies out of both of those things.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a few questions that ask you to speak in the context of your currently sitting in the office, sort of defend the administration or say what you're doing about something, right? The acting director of the National Park Service has proposed downgrading the National Park Service Chesapeake Bay office by transferring control of the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail away from it, and also eliminating the superintendent leading the office. Have you acted on this at all? What would you do? This would essentially be taking something out of your district and moving it away.
I'm going to be quick on this one because I need more information on that, but I will tell you that they're already understaffed. So I'm almost certain I would oppose that and fight for it to happen because I know they're understaffed.
Okay. The EPA, since we were talking about the EPA recently announced changes or potential rollbacks to mercury standards. Do you support the rollback of the mercury rules, or do you oppose them?
I'm going to be candid. I need more information. I don't know exactly where it is, but it doesn't sound good. So I need more information. Okay. To give you a responsible answer.
Fair enough. Look at the transportation sector for a moment. The transportation sector is now the largest source of carbon emissions in the nation. And despite this, the EPA has announced its intentions to roll back the rules designed to reduce tailpipe emissions. This change will have implications for both the environment and for public health. Should the auto manufacturing industry play a role in reducing carbon emissions and other pollutants emitted by cars, or should they be let off?
I don't think it should be let off at all. I think it's a mistake, quite frankly, to pause that. I think we should move and continue to move in that direction. That being said, let's be realistic. The federal government, the EPA, and the executive branch, they're the ones who will set that. What Congress can do is legislate it, but that's unrealistic. It's unrealistic. You're going to have enough votes to be able for Congress to say we're going to set the emissions. I mean, it's just unrealistic. So I can say that, but it's kind of like what you want to hear. It's not the reality and realistic. So I do think that we should continue on the path to make things more fuel efficient. And I'll tell you, I've worked on these types of things. When I was a state delegate, we passed 3 laws that dealt specifically with 18-wheeler trucks, diesel folks, or diesel trucks, to be able to incentivize the industry to get to use natural gas, which is a lot cleaner, of course, than diesel for emissions. And once we passed those 3 laws, the UPS changed their whole fleet, their whole Virginia fleet, to natural gas vehicles, which helps our emissions. So I think we should move in that direction for sure.
Okay. This one is submitted by a registrant who's here. I obviously don't know the name of the person. Do you believe that coal-fired power plants are harmful to the environment, and should they be more regulated, eliminated, transitioned out, transitioned to natural gas, something else?
I think they can be harmful. I think the United States does a better job than anybody in the world, except for maybe a couple countries in Europe, of making sure that it's the least amount of harmful as possible. But I am a free market guy, and the market's actually doing that. The market is reducing the amount of coal-fired plants because of natural gas, because you have this abundance of natural gas in the United States. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And because of the regulatory environment, the financing and such for coal-fired plants, it's actually moving in that direction now. So, I think there's sufficient regulation on them now. And like I said, I think that the market is going to be moving in that direction. Okay. It's going to continue into that direction.
So I'm going to ask you one sort of open-ended but directed question, and then we'll give you the opportunity to make a closing statement. The same question that I asked Taylor-Luria at the end. What is your boldest policy idea to build a clean energy future for Virginia should you go back to Congress in January?
That's a good question. This is my boldest, and you've not heard this, I bet. If you have, raise your hand. My boldest one is this. So nuclear, obviously, zero emissions. The problem is uranium, right? There were 2 elements that were proved by the United States. You had uranium and you had thorium. So when you look at thorium, thorium doesn't sustain a chain reaction, so there's no Fukushima-type meltdown, right? The reason why the United States went to uranium as opposed to thorium, I've been waiting to give this answer for a while. The reason why the United States went to uranium as opposed to thorium is because we wanted to create bombs, right? And then we created a market for uranium and not a market for thorium. Thorium is more abundant in the Earth's surface. It's much more efficient than uranium. You can't make a bomb out of it, and it doesn't have a meltdown. And what should we do about that? What should we do with it? So who knows what the biggest user of energy is in Virginia? Who knows? That would be a good guess, but it's not. It's data centers. Data centers, which are popping up everywhere. They're very, very intense for energy demand. Military is right there, but it's data centers. So I think that the regulatory environment should be changed, that we should work on safe thorium modular plants to be able to power things like data centers, things like military bases, not just here, but also abroad as well. So that's my boldest solution for zero emissions that I think can very much help out the energy grid here in Virginia and free up energy for other things. And it can provide unlimited source of energy for things that are very energy intense, like data centers, like the military, quite frankly. So we have those little modular plants and ships all around here, right? Let's do it with thorium as opposed to uranium and make it a lot safer and where it's more abundant. So that's my biggest bold energy solution.
Great. Well, you now have the opportunity to make a closing statement to the
Sure. Well,
audience.
look, I want to thank you guys for coming out. Can we give CBF a round of applause, please, and all the work that they've done? As your congressman, I came in and said I want to help rebuild the military. I want to take care of veterans. I want to do things to make the conditions of the economy to thrive. And, of course, we dealt with the Chesapeake Bay, which is a national treasure, in my opinion. And if you believe what I believe that it is, that it's essential for economic vitality, that it's essential for our happiness and our health, and if you also want someone who can go up to Congress, and already has, who can, while disagreeing with my own party at times and the president, but still retain the respect of all of them and be able to get things done, then I would be honored to go back to Washington for you and represent you again. And I do ask for your vote November 6th. So thank you guys very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate you all, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank Dr. Kidd. Just 1 second, Dr. Kidd, for moderating our events. Thank you, Representative Taylor. Thank you, Taylor-Luria, who has already left, but thank you to her as well. And thank you to all of you. I cannot endorse either candidate, but I can endorse voting, please.